Oh, hi. I want to make a video on how every single action you have has significance. And in this video, I want to talk about how every single action has significance. And so anyway, as we know, everything is part of this chaotic mechanism and how everything interacts with each other. Things are going to interact a certain way, and it doesn't matter what we do. We're part of the mechanism itself, and obviously we're still going forward. Therefore, it's something that we're still a part of. Are part of the mechanism going forward, and we can only recognize the mechanism from the past perspective, looking back at something that happened, and we're moving forward and realizing that something's going to happen a certain way based on these interactions that we have having. Not only on these interactions, but it's something built into the mechanism, and the interaction is just a better way. The recognition of these interactions is just a better way of recognizing exactly the mechanism happening. It's something that's predetermined. It's predetermined, and the interaction just explains it better. And the interaction that we experience based on all these chaotic movements is just a better way of describing it, a better way of making it so people can understand the concept more than anything. Um, but to a certain extent, those things are two completely separate. It's within the mechanism describing, obviously, these interactions are based on previous interactions and so on and so forth, based on a bunch of different things, but it's different in recognizing it's just part of the fundamental mechanism that things are going to happen a certain way. It's deterministic. And that deterministic, realizing things are going to happen a certain way, is almost in a way distinct from the idea that things are happening a certain way, and all these interactions are obviously going to have effect on you and everything else just as means just as much as you makes you, just as much as the interactions inside of you make it yourself, because it's the interactions. You're a force feedback mechanism interacting, and there's a distinction between your interactions and the interactions leading up to you, and the fact that it's a deterministic mechanism. It's a deterministic mechanism, and the interactions describes that, but the interactions is entirely different from the deterministic mechanism, because the deterministic mechanism just describes something's going to happen a certain way. And that's distinct from saying that obviously all these interactions that have led up to me and my interactions, and everything interacting in a certain way based on an initial cause leading to an effect. Obviously that's where it ties into determinism, but it's distinct between determinism, because obviously that means something's going to happen a certain way, and the interactions happening a certain way affecting you and everything else is distinct in describing that things are obviously just having an effect, and it's describing the mechanism that's obviously leading up till now, and things are leading up till now based on previous effects, and I just know determinism is something that's going to lead into the future based on these effects. Um, Things are going to happen a certain way. If that made any sense. Sorry if it didn't make any sense. So this idea that um, everything has a significance. Every single interaction has significance, and this goes beyond practical means and memes and understanding. Obviously, to us, we put more significance between things that we find more to our that more positive to our sensibilities. Whatever we find more significant. A parade's more significant to me picking my nose or whatever it may be. There's certain things that we put practically based on our point of view, our psychology, more significance in. We have to realize all this significance is null and void. The word doesn't mean much of anything, and I think that's a good way of making another vague concepts video. It's a vague concept, significance. The significance of a certain circumstance doesn't mean much in describing the fundamental aspects of reality, because everything has an interaction, everything means something to a certain extent. But the significance is mostly based on the idea of something feeling, and the feeling, obviously the significance that I'm really talking about, the distinction I make, obviously the significance means something to a certain extent in describing a person feeling a sensation being felt and interacting. Obviously the more it has more significance, the more it causes, in the end, as a whole, this whole mechanism and individual pieces, it means more based on the sensation. The more negative a person feels, the more relief a person feels or a sentient being feels, any creature feels, is more significant than, say, something else of a person feeling less or whatever it may be. The more a person something feels, the more something senses or feels, the more significant it is, either positive or either the deprivation or the relief. Whatever it is, it's more significant. But the other significance that I want to mention, um, that I think is everything has a significance. Say in the passage of time is the thing that I want to describe. The significance that I'm really describing here is everything has significance that's going to have an effect on the value that we view. Something's going to happen. One thing's going to lead to another, and that's going to have an effect on an interaction that's going to lead to some kind of value equation. And obviously we can apply these certain circumstances to say something that directly causes, obviously the knife is the thing that directly causes the pain, the deprivation, and the relief that you feel of pulling the knife out of your hand. That pain and the deprivation, the pain, the suffering, and the relief of that suffering, the relief, the joy, the happiness, whatever it may be you want to mistake for describing a certain situation of relief, or call it happy, in which many cases that's the way life is tricking us. We think we're happy when we're just getting away from a negative. We're depriving ourselves first. We don't realize it. We don't realize we're getting hungry, and that's obviously a redundant process that happens over and over again. And when we satisfy that hunger and we're hungry, obviously it can feel good to a certain extent, but it also feel bad, and especially when you get full. Being hungry, obviously it's either you don't feel yourself up enough and you're still hungry, or you fill yourself up too much and you're full, and that becomes a negative sensation. But I don't even know where I was going with that. But yes, these things based on a certain degree have an interaction, and it's these things that lead, obviously I mentioned like the knife going directly into the hand. And that obviously has a value statement. We all understand that relief and the deprivation and the relief that we experience based on these things having an interaction. But everything to a certain extent has value, because we know that these things have an effect on the value judgment based on the linearity and how things are going to have an effect on something. The thing that leads up to something having an effect on something means just as much than the thing that's causing, say, the deprivation or the relief of something, the circumstance, because everything is part of the circumstance. It's a constant flowing piece. It's a constant flowing string moving around and constantly flowing and going in its own direction, moving in its own space, moving in its own particular way. It's moving in its own particular way, and it's having a certain interaction, and that interaction leads, say, to the knife going to your hand and coming out, even if it's just you touching something, and that touching something leads to you picking up a knife and you cut a tomato, and all of a sudden it goes through your hand, and that leads to your deprivation or your suffering. It means just as much the interaction that we have as a whole leading up to that interaction, because that interaction, like I mentioned before, regardless of the value of it that we say based on the deprivation, the suffering, it means something because it led up to something that caused the deprivation, because everything moment has a significance. And practically speaking, like we describe certain situations, like you graduating from college or high school or whatever it may be, or you winning a prize, you winning the lottery, whatever it may be, is more significant than you wiping your ass after you take a dump, whatever it may be, after you take a shit. It means more than, say, that. This as much has a significance because that leads up to a certain point, because everything is built off of previous experience, and that means just as much as the thing that happens in the future based on that reaction. But that thing means just as much. So to a certain extent, everything has an effect. It's just the effect that it has on the value, and the value in and of itself is distinct because the value is something that creates in and of itself regardless of the circumstance. It doesn't matter the circumstance or what causes the pain, it's the fact that the pain exists, and that's the distinction, and why every moment and interaction has significance, and how that significance is built off of previous experience, and how that experience is completely disconnected from the fact that you're going to obviously experience some kind of deprivation or something, because that deprivation came from something previously, and it's about the interaction as a whole. And these interactions mean something because they're built off of previous interactions, and so on and so forth. So they mean something regardless of previous things happening. And that's where the distinction comes from. Sorry, I'm kind of spacing out. Yes, so it's obviously the value judgment exists in of itself, and these interactions mean something, and it doesn't matter what causes the value. It's a matter that the value exists, and there's a significance. I think the distinction, there's significance in every interaction, but there's not value in every interaction, and that's a distinction I want to make in describing the situation, because there's significance in every single interaction because it's built off of previous interaction, like I've mentioned before. So it leads up to a certain value judgment, and it doesn't matter what causes it. That's the thing. It's the value that exists and tangible from the actual significant circumstance or moment that causes something, or the physiology, because the physiology is separate from the value. Just the value comes out of the physiology that we're experiencing. My psychology reacts to something outside and reacts and causes some kind of suffering. Physiology is experiencing some kind of suffering because I'm experiencing it as physiologically. But it doesn't exist beyond a certain extent because it's the harm. The value exists in of itself, but it exists from this physiology, and it's disconnected. Sort of like every single moment, every single interaction of this physiology and interaction of existence means something. But the value just is something that's added on top of those interactions, and that's where every interaction has a significance, because regardless of when the value comes in, the interaction and the significance of each moment and circumstance means something, because the value can come from anywhere in those significant moments, and those moments that we call significant, because they can come from anywhere, and they can be built off of any of these moments that we have. It's just the circumstance is disconnected from the value that we experience, but the value is on top of this, is built off of this circumstance, and it doesn't matter what causes the value to happen, it just matters that it happens, and that's where it comes from, that every single moment has a significance, because the value is based on that significance, either from something happening previously, or from experiencing it, directly from a circumstance creating that value based on an interaction that's happening, or a circumstance that's happening. But the value is completely distinct from the circumstance happening. That's where the circumstance has significance just as much as anything else. Every single moment has its significance. And I think that's all I want to say. I've made redundant enough, just enough in this video. So thank you. And if I need to mention anything else, I'll mention in another video. So thank you. Until next time. Bye.